I mean, when we look at people's happiness in their relationships versus like the comparison with the amount of people that they've had intimate relationships with, there tends to be a lot of variation in the long-term happiness or success of a relationship.
You talking marriages?
I'm sorry?
You mean like marriages?
I believe the last time I looked at the statistics, it was looking at people who were in marriages. So on the lower end of the spectrum, if you tended to have less bodies, and I believe the number is somewhere between like 1 to 3, you tended to have less successful marriages. And then as those numbers kind of get up a little bit and a little bit, those are where you kind of, it stabilizes, you get like more happy, more successful marriages or relationships. And don't cite me on the marriages thing. It could just be relationships. It's been a while since I've looked at that data. But then on the other end, where you get into the, the higher numbers, what people would call more extreme numbers, more, more promiscuous people, their marriages also tend to be less happy. So on both ends of the extremes, you tend to have less happy marriages. And then somewhere in the middle, you tend to have, more happier marriages or relationships. Those relationships are more successful.
Yeah, I think I'm familiar with what you're citing. I think, now, again, don't quote me either because we don't have the data in front of us, but right. I believe that this was based around marriage. And now, you're not talking about Pew. You're talking about, I think there's a specific study on that. I just can't think of what it is. I'm sure we could pull it up or have Brian pull it up. But did this account for secular versus non-secular marriages?
For what? Sorry, what was the word?
Secular versus non-secular. So like religious marriages versus non-religious.
I wouldn't know. We'd have to look at the data.
Yeah.
Because once again, I'm not even sure if they were talking about marriages.
Well, can we agree that at least according to modern data and including Pew Research did a bunch on this as well, that people who are in highly religious marriages, they tend to divorce less than people who are not in highly religious marriages?
Sure. Yeah. There might be factors that account for that. Like maybe it's looked down upon in their culture to get divorced, even if you're going through something difficult like abuse. Because just to get clear on this, you think that people who are being abused should leave their partner, right?
Depending on severity, not necessarily the first order, but if there's, depending on severity.
Do you think that people who are being physically abused should leave their partners?
Again, it would
same answer.
It would depend on severity.
Okay, so you think even if there is physical abuse present, that someone should
I think
stay?
That two people can get drunk, right? And like a woman can smack a dude in the back of the head. That would be considered physical abuse, and then just never do it again the rest of her life. I'm not going to tell that woman to like run out on her marriage.
Okay.
Right? I don't, or tell that guy like, oh, something like that. Or here's another thing that's really common. So, you see this in just normal relationships all the time. Like a guy will make a snide comment, and like let's say they're watching a movie or something, he'll make a snide comment, and the woman will kind of like smack him on the arm, you know what I mean, or something like that.
Right.
Is that physical abuse? No. I guess it could be considered that. Not. So, but it's severity. It's up to severity.
I don't know that I would call it in a case of abuse. Like if you were messing around with your wife and she like smacked you upside the head as a joke, I don't think you would call that abuse. I don't think most people would be. I wouldn't call it
abuse.
Right.
I wouldn't.
Okay, so just for the sake of this conversation, actions that weren't intended to be
Again, I
harmful.
think it depends on severity.
Okay. Well, I think for the sake of this, we can exclude those cases. We can exclude the cases where someone just like
I still think
jokingly pushes you.
Yeah, I still think that it would depend on severity. Like, I also think a woman can get really, really upset, and one time she slapped her husband because she was so upset. Or let's say she threw a plate across the room and it broke. Okay. Something like that. I think that there's some of these things are pardonable and you can work past them. I don't think that those are necessarily they could be red flags for sure, but I'm not going to tell a person that they need to give up on their marriage over them.
Sure. Do you think most cases of abuse are worthy of kind of divorcing your partner? Just out of curiosity.
Well, like physical abuse, maybe. What is considered emotional abuse, probably not.
Right. We can exclude it to, like persistent emotional abuse would be something you would say you should probably end a relationship over, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. We can agree there.
Persistent emotional abuse, depending on how it's categorized.
What do you mean by how it's categorized?
Well, it depends on how you would categorize emotional abuse. It's very evasive.
Okay. That's fine. But we can just say like, you think that the most most times when people get divorced over emotional abuse, they're usually talking about those like severe cases, right? Like they're talking about like
No.
persistent.
No, I'm not. I'm not at all convinced that when people say they're, especially women, that they're getting a divorce based on emotional abuse, that there was anything other than just she just wasn't happy based on other circumstances. They called it emotional abuse because it's such a nebulous term.
Okay, that's fine. I might actually be fine with that. I think there's a problem with psychology where the average person has adopted terms that are specific psychological terms.
Like narcissist?
Everyone's a narcissist now. Everyone has autism now. Everyone is, BPD now. So whatever term. Everyone's gaslighting everyone. I understand that. I think there is some truth to that. And to the extent that there is truth to that, it should be like handled and understood by people generally. But I would say in a lot of cases, that's the case where you have like severe emotional, what you would categorize, we can just use whatever your standard is.
For severe emotional abuse.
Sure, yeah. Whatever your standard is for severe emotional abuse and severe physical abuse, you would think that that would be more likely to be covered up in, let's say, like religious families, right?
No,
where there's...
I don't think it's more likely. In fact, I think that the reason it works is because you're more likely to get help. So because you have an ecclesiastical structure and traditional church functions, you have a community which is there that's able to actually assist inside of these relationships for these problems that come up, whereas a lot of other people don't have resources or they have secular resources. So
you think that... Okay, I mean, maybe that's like an empirical claim, once again, because it's kind of hard to just say that like, oh...
Well, there's a lot of good evidence for this. So the fact of the matter is that you would just logically agree with this probably, that if you have community which you can turn to for assistance in your marriage, that's probably better than not having a community to turn to for assistance in your marriage.
Yeah,
that's
of course,
probably always the case.
But if that community reinforces ideas that like, men are supposed to have power over women and in sometimes a physical sense.
That shouldn't be problematic if within the view of the religion, both partners believe that.
Right. Sorry. I'm going to wait for him to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're like scaring. I'm like waiting for it.
I apologize.
It's like someone's popping a balloon.
don't
I'm just like waiting.
You guys continue. All right.
Okay. Sure, there can be these structures, but if these structures reinforce the idea that it's good to stay with your partner no matter what, like there are sects of like Catholics who believe that you should never get divorced. Like it's bad any time that you do it. There are sects of
No, that's incorrect.
Baptists or Protestants.
Catholics are under one single ecclesiastical church authority, and the doctrines are uniform across Catholicism itself, or you're not in communion with the church. So that being the case, their ecclesiastical authority is going to be an unchanging standard from their view. So it's not going to change. It's going to be... And if you're not part of that, you're not part of the Catholic Church. And it would be the same thing with like Orthodox Christians. You would not be a part of this body itself by its own ecclesiastical rules.
That's like church politics. I mean, that's fine. You can say that like, okay, well, if Catholics claim this,
you'll be all right.
That was underwhelming.
Okay. I was like...
Don't worry, I had my...
You like hyped it up too.
I had my
like,
hands on the...
Don't
He
shoot me
did.
in
He
the
brought
eye.
it up.
These glasses are real. Please don't test that.
Thank you, Ogle. Appreciate it. I'll get you guys the... Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but you can boil that down to like church politics. Like they can call them like not real Christians or not real Protestants, not real Catholics, whatever, if they choose to, follow this doctrine that says
Protestants
that, like, it's okay
can do that, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's fine. You think that there's some like pretty blasphemous or like unorthodox
No, that's
Catholics.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about... So not every single church authority has an ecclesiastical or governmental structure. So you violate this structure, you're not a part of this. That's really clear guidelines for what makes you the thing or not the thing. Like we have clear guidelines for what makes us the United States of America. So there are church authorities which have very clear guidelines to what makes you a part of that authority. If you violate it, you're not a part of it. That's...
Right. You can say that they're not a part of the head. Like they're not under, that domain anymore. That's fine. But they have all of the other properties that go along with that.
No, they don't, or they would be part of the thing itself.
I think this is just semantics.
No, but it is semantics, but it's really important when we're talking about this because what we're discussing is... if you're a part of this religious denomination and it's giving you kind of this bad advice, et cetera, should you be relying on them as a community? And then when you bring up Catholicism as an example, it's like, well, I want to make sure that you're not strawmanning what Catholics believe before you make whatever the empirical claim
I'm
is.
not. I'm just saying you agree that there are some.
Yeah.
So we'll do a quick cheers.
Cheers to Ogle.
Ogle, thank you for the Cristal champagne bottle pop. Salud.
Salute. Yeah.
Cheers.
So there are people who still claim that, though. They still claim the church, and then they go against maybe some, typical teachings of the
Sure.
church. That's fine.
But
Okay,
when we're
so there's
looking
no
at
disagreement
empirics,
there.
when they say Catholic, right?
You think they're just lying, or you think
No.
they're
When they
confused?
say Catholic, I'm just saying there's actual specific criteria for what makes you Catholic.
Yeah, that's fine. That doesn't change, and none of my argument hinges on that. Like
Okay.
none of the questioning we're talking
Just
about hinges
clearing
on
it
that.
up.
Okay, that's fair. But yeah, look. So if these certain sects of Christianity, whether that's Protestantism, whether that's some weird off-brand Catholic that is claiming they're Catholic and you don't really believe that they're Catholic, or they're in fact not Catholic. If those people are in those situations where those ideas are reinforced, that like you should stay together because marriage is holy, you shouldn't violate marriage, you should uphold these like beliefs about staying together for kids, like that maybe their religion promotes like nuclear families, and so they hold that above like severe physical abuse. Like you think that that's wrong, and you think that that's probably more likely that they'll stay together.
I think it's unlikely that you're going to find any mainstream church denominations which uphold abusive relationships.
They don't necessarily have to overtly uphold them. They can do it in subvert ways, like reinforcing, like telling their members privately to keep this private. We don't want this to look bad on the church. We don't want this to look bad on your family. It looks bad on God.
So yeah, secularists do the same thing within their own family dynamics and be like, well, we don't want this to get
agree.
out. It could be embarrassing, et
that.
cetera, et cetera. So my whole point though was that if there is a community present, right, for marriage, generally it's a good thing. And it generally helps marriages, doesn't hurt them. And so one of the things that we see is that people who are rigorous with their church authority tend to stay married longer. And it's exactly because of those concepts, in fact, that is reinforced by the community that's so helpful to these marriages.
Right, but there could be concepts in the community like, no matter what, it's still bad to divorce your partner, even if they're abusing you, because it goes against God's will, because it goes against XYZ, insert whatever religious reason that they want to give. So gathering data on that is going to be really hard. That's the only point that I'm making here. Is like gathering data on whether or not they're actually having a happy,
but gathering
non-abusive.
gathering data on almost anything is really hard.
There's some instances where it's exceptionally hard, and that is one of the cases.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's one of the cases. Like when we're talking about, there's exceptional record keeping kept, especially by like Catholic churches. It's so exceptional, in fact, that they kept all the records of like the abuses that happened with underage kids and this kind of thing, right? They do pretty exceptionally keep records, and they do get reviewed by other priest parishes, oversights by bishops, all sorts of different things. And it's like, I think that if such things were happening in mass, we'd be hearing about them. I'm not saying that some churches may not have things like this going on, just like some secular families could, based on, I'm an internet personality, I don't want it to get out, or I have a big reputation, I don't want you to, you know what I mean? It's the same exact thing.
No, I agree.
There,
I think that does happen in Hollywood a lot. I think that happens where they go, well, we don't want this movie to look bad, so let's cover up this thing that Johnny Depp and Amber Heard did.
Just
like,
anybody in a prestigious position or doesn't want embarrassment or whatever. So, but
so the church is not exempt to that. So when you say like, oh, well, people in religious institutions tend to stay married for longer, there might be some issues with that because of the fact that there's this image to uphold for religion itself and for the church and the institution.
They wouldn't be the only ones beholden to it. And the correlate there is so strong that the more rigorous. So here's the thing. We know this because we can look at people. Various churches have different sacramental or religious, functions that you need to follow. The more you follow X function, the longer you stay married, right?
Sure.
Now, is that causation? Probably. There could be other things. In fact, there is going to be other things, right? But it's a pretty strong correlate there.
It seems like there's an equivocation though between a long marriage, like a long-lasting marriage, and a happy marriage. And
But
there's
happiness is done by self-report, right? So
Well, that's probably one of the best ways that we have access to people's happiness. Yeah.
Yeah. And so these people are self-reporting happiness as well. In fact, women who get married as virgins, their self-reported happiness in their marriage is much, much higher than the opposition. And the most recent study that I read on that, so the reason is because there's no sample size for comparison against that. So if you've only ever slept with one man, essentially you don't know what you're missing, if you are missing
Right.
anything. And so you're just kind of happy and content. That seems like it's pretty good for society.